Walter Smith poured himself a cup of tea, took a seat in the corner of the Rangers dressing room and watched as his players exchanged insults and punches. It was half-time of the sixth league game of the season, and his double-winning side had yet to regain their form, with only 2 wins, 2 draws and a chaotic defeat up at Dundee. Now they were a goal down at home to the early leaders, Aberdeen, scored by Roy Aitken no less, and those frustrations had finally reached breaking point. Andy Gorham had felt that Nigel Spackman had left Aitken in too much space at the edge of the box and lambasted him at the time, only to receive not one but 2 wanker gestures in return. "I was apoplectic, in a seethe," wrote Gorham. That wasn't Rangers. We didn't publicly point the finger at people. Presumably loudly berating teammates in public was fair game, but either way the Rangers goalkeeper nearly took the dressing room door off its hinges at the break. Gorham warned Spackman that if he ever did anything like that again, he would fucking kill him. Spackman coolly replied, "Sit down, you fat bastard," and all hell broke loose as 3 punches were landed on the midfielder before the team managed to prise the 2 senior professionals apart. It was only then that Smith intervened. He found the right moment where he could remind his players that enough was enough, that their current levels were nowhere near the best, and that this had to change. And because of the heightened tension in the room, the warning would have resonance. What happened next didn't just leave the Rangers support spellbound for the remaining 45 minutes, but for the rest of a long season. A switch had been flicked that made Rangers seem unbeatable, not only at home, but more importantly on the continent too. Rangers had helped build the footballing stage of the future, and soon they'd be on it, bringing the house down as television audiences throughout the United Kingdom became hooked on the drama that unfolded, with neutrals in southern England becoming every bit as tense as those Ibrox regulars. Never before nor since have Rangers been both as dominant at home and as relevant at the forefront of the European game. The dream shared by generations to be kings of Europe felt both so tangible and yet tantalisingly ephemeral. As lucid and as engaging as contrarian arguments may have been over the years, let there be no doubt about it. This was the greatest season of them all, and to discuss our 4-part look at the impossible dream 92-93, I'm joined by David Edgar. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you, Martyn. Very much looking forward to this summer of 92, where I actually did get my first real 6-string. So that plays very much into a nostalgic summer for me. When you and I, along with James Forrest, went back and did the look at 92-93, it's in the archives, folk, if you search for it. I think both of us were a little surprised by the start. Yeah. Because I had erased it from my memory that 1992-93 is all glory, really. That was what my mind presented it as. And it wasn't. It became it, but there was a poor start, a languid start, followed by the thing is, after a poor start, you don't know it's all going to be good, and you're going to go 44 domestic matches unbeaten in the European run. So you've got to build up, and I think it was really only in the latter stages of that season, with the excitement for Europe, that we realised just how special everything was. So it's always interesting to go back, even seasons that we dissect plenty, that we look over, that we remember so fondly. As I'm talking to you, I'm looking at my wall. I've got a Clive Tilsley commentary chart of the 92-93 season. It's one of my favourites, but there's still that little bit at the start that just seems to slip out the discussion.
Well, that's what this show's for, I suppose. If David's here, Alan's here. How are we, Alan?
Yeah, I'm really good, Martyn. Like David, looking forward to this one. Just delighted to be back. Without doubt, this, I would say, is my favourite season to watch Rangers. I think, as David said too, that the kind of start, I was used to, as you know, Martyn, typically we were bad starters. And I think one of the reasons as well we'll get into was obviously the European Championships, and what happens is instead of guys getting a break during the summer, they tend to go off and do tournaments, and you'll find that typically starting then it could have an impact. But yeah, right up until, I would say, probably the latter part of August, there was that, what's going on here, you know, and then from then on, it was just absolutely wonderful. As I say, without a doubt, the greatest season for me to watch, both domestically and obviously in Europe too.
Yeah, I mean, full house here. It was a very special season. I've discussed this many times. First year as a season ticket holder, been going to games, but never as regularly as that. And we seemingly just got tickets for just about every away game and in Europe. My dad and I, and it was quite the thing. First of all, by the way, thank you, listeners, for your attendance, interaction, engagement last week in our live Zoom show. David and I are always full of trepidation when we do these things. The usual rule: if we get more listening that are on the panel, then super. But it was fantastic. We might do another one with a specific topic in mind, maybe later on down the track. But thank you very much for that. Alan, you mentioned the European Championships. I want to start there, actually, because it is the kind of focal point of the Scottish football in summer '92, 500 miles east of Aberdeen in southern Sweden. Scotland taking part in the European Championships for the first ever time. 5 Rangers players in the squad: Gorham, Gough, McCall, and of course McCoist, and joined by Dave McPherson, who had returned. He'd signed for Rangers before the tournament started from Hearts. Ian Durrant had been offered the opportunity to maybe go, but discussions with Smith felt it was best just to get a proper summer under his belt. He wouldn't do himself justice, wasn't quite there yet, and I think it's probably fair to say we reaped the rewards of that as this season would be unfolding. All those 5 were in the starting 11. They took, they were a big part of proceedings. Only David Robertson, I think, who'd enjoyed this kind of fine debut season, could feel maybe aggrieved at not making the squad at all. And Davey, Scotland go out and their usual style at the first stage. Okay, I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Getting there, by the way, was an achievement. There is, this was a European Championship of just 8 teams. There's no Spain, there's no Italy, there's no Belgium, there's no Portugal. Denmark, who would win, get brought off, the beach famously. Yugoslavia had to be replaced. And Scotland qualified ahead of Romania, Bulgaria, and Switzerland in their qualifying group. Fast forward 2 years to the World Cup in 1994, just to see how strong those nations were. The draw was horrific. You've got the holders, Holland. You've got the World Cup winners, Germany, as it is now, the first tournament under reunification. You have the effective runners-up of the tournament 4 years before, formerly USSR, now the Commonwealth of Independent States. It's a real tough go. The Dutch game, Marco van Basten said, that you dismissed Scotland as being all kick and rush. 77 minutes, Scotland kind of kept them out. Dennis Bergkamp just being a bit too good. Scotland battered Germany. I mean, they had about 14 corners, but Germany were just kind of ruthless up front. We've heard this story before. And then finally, a 3-0 win over the CIS. Really good performance. There was no Costa Rica here. There's no Peru. There's no catastrophic defensive calamity. Roxburgh talked about it being a kind of impossible challenge that they that suited them. No sense of anxiety, said. We relished the idea of playing those teams. We didn't like to have the territory and the ball to ourselves. We played our best off the tackle. He'd found for a brief moment, because this really won't happen again, a side with decent balance, good team spirit, tactically comfortable and being reactive to kind of better quality opponents. This would be a familiar theme for Walter Smith's Rangers this season.
Yeah, it certainly would. Everything you said there is factual. 8 teams. It was a different tournament back then. There were 8 teams, 2 groups, and that meant it was very, very difficult to get to it, because obviously there's a lot more than that. And you mentioned the names who didn't make it, and that wasn't unusual in the Euros. It was such a dog-eat-dog thing, and it was a much more open draw back then. You didn't have the rigid seeding that we now get to kind of prevent big countries not making it. But at the time, I think that Rangers supporters' relationship with the national team was a lot less complicated than it is now. Certainly for 15-year-old David, I was a very big Scotland fan at the time. And there was excitement about getting there, because it had kind of become like a routine joke. We get to the World Cup, but we don't get to the Euros, and that was a fact. It never happened. And then we got there. There was no way to get a draw that wasn't difficult. There are 8 teams, and when we saw our draw, Holland, Germany, the reigning holders and the reigning World Cup holders, Christ. So the expectation level wasn't as big, and there wasn't that pressure that there was at World Cups where we were all desperate to get through, because we'd been there so often. There was a novelty factor because we felt we'd achieve something just by getting there. And you're absolutely right. Holland were just a bit too good for us. We did pretty well. It was very competitive, but in the end, they just had a wee bit too much skill. Andy Gorham had a fine match that day. Germany, Scotland played really, really well. I wondered if it was actually a bit of belief, just that we don't beat Germany. I do wonder if there was a little bit of that, and you have to remember that respect that we all have, I think, in Britain for Germany in tournament football.
Yeah, and Richard Gough had said, actually, Gough and McCoist, they're all very, no one expects us to win it. Let's keep everything kind of calmed down. Very prosaic about it. I get what you mean overall about the Germany game, but I go back to the point I made earlier. Scotland really did have a go. It was fearless.
Yeah,
it wasn't kind of standoffish, too much respect. It was just like they lacked the cutting edge. And what we're going to have to talk about tonight, and over the next 4 weeks, weirdly, it's something we're going to have to revisit. We are right bang in the middle of Ali McCoist's golden period, these 2 seasons, where he can't stop scoring at home. He's anonymous. Starts the games just marked out and easily marked out the tournament. Following on from that, the disappointment in Italy. We're going to talk when Rangers get to the Champions League. Again, about McCoist's ability maybe to find space at that level is maybe something that we will revisit. But it's so odd, given just how hot he is. We're not talking about a purple patch, over the winter, and he's kind of tiring. Look how he finished that season. Look at those 2 goals away at Aberdeen, the final league game. He's just, there's something there, Davey, at that level, and I'd like Alan on this as well.
Well, fair enough. You can't dismiss it. We also have to remember he's coming off a bad experience in 1990, which may have had an effect. We're a manager who out and out destroyed his confidence, or would have destroyed the confidence of an ordinary player. Secondly, he's not playing with Mark Hateley, and that's a huge factor. And there's nothing wrong in saying that. That's not a weakness on Ali's point. Of course, good players play better when they've got better players with them, and they had that lethal partnership. But Ali's international goal record for Scotland is very respectable. So he was
huge in qualifying.
Yeah, he could
both the World Cup here and this Euros.
He could absolutely cut it. I just in general, Martyn, think that Scotland, certainly by 92, and it's got worse over the years, do have this complex of that we don't have high expectations. I think it's a legacy of 78. I really do. I think that we kind of expect bad things to happen to us. And there was definitely an air of, we're just happy to be here. Oh, we did quite well against the Dutch. Oh, we did quite well against the German. There wasn't loads of regret. There wasn't loads of, if only we'd done this. And then we went out into that CIS game and smashed them, absolutely smashed them 3 up in the first half. Even Brian McClare, who played 800 games for Scotland, and I think he got his only goal. But this is also not just an Ali McCoist thing. Let's look at some of the strikers Scotland have in the 80s. Andy Gray, Graham Sharp, Kenny Dalglish, Mo Johnson, Charlie Nicholas, Frank McAvenny. Ali's record is as good, if not better, than all of theirs at goals to games for Scotland. Scotland had a problem, and it was not just limited to this team. It was right the way through. Scotland always seemed to have a problem with scoring goals at international level, despite having guys who were playing. Steve Archibald was playing at Barcelona, for Christ's sake.
At tournament level.
Yeah, they didn't have the players, as you say, up front. You've got McCoist, but I know the point you're making, Martyn, about no finding space. But then if you've got other people up front who are doing a bit of moving and so on, it creates it. If they're not doing that,
Jury and Gallagher they're workers. They did and they do move.
Yeah,
you've not got a workhorse midfield in there. You get McStay, McAllister. I think McClare dropped deep at times. You've got Collins. You've got Ball playing.
They're not the same class as some of the players that Davey mentioned, the likes of the Dalglishs and so on, and even the likes of Charlie Nicholas, Mo Johnson and so on. So I think the other thing you need to bear in mind too with this tournament if you look even at Holland, you've got Koeman, Bergkamp, Pullet, Van Basten, some of the players that they've got, Van Nistelrooy, Rijkaard, even Germany as well. You've got Thomas Hassler, Effenberg, Andres Muller, Sammer, Klinsmann. They've got some absolutely cracking players. So I think it's a bit unfortunate that you're up against probably, obviously, two of the greatest sides anyway. And, but no, I don't think it's just an alley one. I think it is more to do with certainly a Scotland middle to front, that side of things.
Yeah, well, again, it will be something we revisit because he is going to fill his boots yet again, spoiler alert, this season. But in those 6 Champions League games, again, lifting the level up, nothing. Now, Davy's original point, the Hateley partnership, for a variety of reasons in those 6 Champions League games, is not going to be overused. I think it plays less than half of the full complement. So that's a fair argument, and we will come back to it, I think, as the season develops. I've kind of said this in the live show. There should have been a kind of feel good factor, but it was a decent showing. But there wasn't. It was downbeat. I mentioned these odds. Rangers had kind of gone from these exciting favourites under the Soonest Revolution and something new, bringing it into the mix, to now foregone conclusion. 3-1 on Aberdeen, who would be the closest challengers by a long shot in this season, 14-1. There's something structurally changed, and it's a nonsense outside the Rangers. Liam Brady, season preview. Listen to this. I said before the start of last season that we would win a trophy, and although we didn't, I am saying the same thing again this time. We're almost in kind of pantomime territory here. It is clown car, toy town stuff. Again, we've got the 44 game thing. It's words like endurance and marathons. Everyone seems to be exhausted before a ball's kicked. But Davey, it's the summer of the proposed Scottish Super League breakaway, no doubt influenced by events early in 1992 down south. This was led by Rangers, Hearts, Celtic, Aberdeen, Dundee United. We will get to its failure in a couple of weeks, I think, but their aims, a structure more attractive than the existing Premier Division, something more competitive, improvement of facilities for spectators, and an increase in financial returns. I think the latter was projected at £15 million in the first 3 years by way of controlling television, clearly the English model, sponsorship, advertising, marketing, merchandise. Really the clubs taking control. It was never destined to be successful. Scottish Football League had Rule 51, which stated that any players belonging to the club that quits membership would automatically become the league's property and could be sold by them. Not to mention the need to get Jim Farry and the SFA kind of behind that venture in order to be recognised as Scotland's representatives in European competition. None of the plans would have a direct impact about the quality of the game. Still those 4 meetings a season, Davey. The stadium criteria, it's the Taylor report stuff, it's still a bit of a fantasy. Celtic are still miles away. They're still talking about Cambuslang and their new £100 million dream home. Mm-hmm. Again, there's a lot of good in that. There's a lot of practical benefit. The clubs should be running it. That's the lesson from England, and marketing themselves properly and getting a good TV deal properly. But we're going to start talking about this Scotland-wide, but soon we're going to start talking about this Rangers over the coming months. The word's not really matching the reality of what was possible.
No, because I think it was rushed. I think it was entirely based, as you say, on, look at what England are doing. And I think that they just tried to take as much as they could from that without really looking at the differences and how they could apply it. And it got the conversation going, which will eventually lead to the SPL and eventually now to the SPFL. Your own views on that are, I'm sure, for listeners, not that different to mine. But it did lead to change eventually. It got the conversation started, so I suppose they could claim a little bit of success there. That rule in particular, which incidentally is highly illegal. You can't you can't just go and take assets from a company. It's just not legal. But that was the kind of weird wee bowling club world Scottish football was. We had these rules. The TV deal, this is the year that it gets blown apart. That Jim Farry can stop an independent television channel from showing a football match. That goes this year. And what became clear over the next few seasons is a lot of these rules, Bosman rule will come in, because we're still at a stage, by the way, where a club can hold your registration and stop you getting a move to another club, even if your contract's finished. We are coming to a stage where modernity hits football, not just in Scotland. Some leagues took to it better than others. We had we still have entrenched power bases, but back then, you would have guys from the Scottish Junior FA who had votes on things about, like international football and about European football. It was quite a bizarre little setup that hadn't evolved since the 1930s. And eventually, business interests, and I know that this is a bit of a theme of this programme, Martyn. I think that sometimes what happens in England takes a few years, or London takes a few years to make its way up the road to Scotland. And I think that this was a result of that sort of much more business-based 80s culture that came in London. It leads to the English Premiership. It then comes to Scotland where people say, no, I'm sorry, we're not prepared to see our businesses damaged by the fact that a little fat bloke who looks like an onion called Jim Farry doesn't like it. And this is, if you like, a really early sign of that. But, this season, ITV driver coaching horses through Farry's rule, and he's left standing there complaining, holding a piece of paper saying, well, our rules say you can't, and ITV saying, and why do we give a toss about your rules, mate? We've nothing to do with you. And that was exactly it. Now, there was always going to be a fight, but I can just imagine if the Scottish Football League had gone to court and said, we now own the assets of this business, the judge would have burst out laughing and probably sent their lawyer to jail for contempt for wasting the court's time. But this was the world that we were up against, and it's always going to be frustrating. We're sitting here in 2022 and we're frustrated with the SPFL, and there is this sort of, I think, organisational, structural incompetence that goes throughout Scottish football, because I think it's been so long. We need a culture change, and that's a very difficult thing to do with an organisation that's been about for years, because people have worked there for so long, and people, it's kind of like the city council.
Yeah.
People always talk about needing to change it, and it sounds easy, and then you go in and there's so many entrenched power bases. That was what was happening here. But this, I think, mid-90s, we begin to, people start challenging things that were shibboleth. We can't show a football match because East Stirling are playing Clyde. And then eventually people began to go, well, why can't we? John Mark Bosman would go to court and cost him his career, but he would change football forever. People began to challenge, and I think that this is an early sign in Scotland of that.
Al?
Yeah, I would think the biggie for me as well was how slow things moved. I think we go back a couple of years and we're obviously the top team, anyway, certainly we're ahead of England too, and then things start changing. But we're so slow, as David said, because of this bowling club come internal stuff. So you've got things happening in Europe, obviously, in terms of kind of changes and so on. You're getting England really getting its act together, and we're just getting held by here. And the other thing as well that I think really scunners me too is, even if we did get things moving a wee bit quicker in terms of the kind of league stuff and so on, and who has the power, you've then got different clubs, depending where they are in the stage. Rangers are obviously further on. As you say, you've got Celtic still looking to try and get another. And all that we're doing is we're just harming ourselves, so that ultimately when things do move on, the world's just moved on 4 or 5 paces.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
That is spot on, Alan, and that is Scottish football in a nutshell. By the time we catch up to an idea, it's already obsolete, and it happens to us at youth development level. Spain's really trendy. No, Spain was trendy 10 years ago. We're actually 3 models along. You are spot on. This is always Scottish football. We always take so long to put an idea into practice that by the time we do it, it's obsolete. It's the dreadnought of ideas, and it happens time after time.
And as soon as proved that when you do have a revolutionary, they're usually not shrinking violets by nature, and the new ideas, the new way of doing it, you need to treat players properly, you need to do this, you need to do that. Well, that doesn't it just gets the hackles up. And as we saw, Rangers were in a war with the authorities pretty much from day one of his arrival. So yeah, you're absolutely right. One correction or one caveat: there would have been the 4 times a season, but with only 8 teams, because it was a proposal for just 8 teams. Then it'd be a 28 league season, I think. So not as much wear and tear. I mean, 44 games was just grueling. It was absolutely horrendous. We mentioned this or discussed this in the live show last week, but the nation's economy was no more booming than the Scottish football's. There's a recession on, and that means that some of the ambition that some of those clubs had shown in response to the Soonest Revolution was now contracting, or having to contract, or starting to slow down. Price Waterhouse had a report on Scottish football said only Aberdeen and Dundee United were living within their means. Some clubs living well outside. Rangers were, but could cope with it because the commercial revenue could service that debt. Absolutely no problem at all. What an interesting thing on that first day of the season. A change in tone from the support who had enjoyed all this kind of splashing the cash and the club being on the up and that kind of loads of money Harry Enfield caricature. On the first day of the season, Rangers paraded 24 top-of-the-range Volkswagens and Audis, supplied by the new director, Ian Scale. I'll get to that in a minute. But some felt that, when unemployment's rising, the economy's shrinking, such a blatant display of wealth, Alan, you've rubbed some people up the wrong way and start to get a feeling that, this match-going experience is really, really changing for me.
It did. It certainly made us, I don't know, I mean, we laughed at that loads of money, and how well we were doing at the time and all the English signings. But as you say, there tend to be a kind of, I don't know, a kind of undertone or a sort of feeling within the fans of this whole, they're not really treating us kind of like customers now. I think you mentioned in the live one as well about David Murray talking about people complaining about prices of tickets and so on. But
years later,
there just seemed to be more of a distance. And I've always talked about, the board, the actual players in the park and the fans all being together. Just felt some cracks. Obviously, during this season, it'll all be great as we go through, but there definitely did seem to, and I don't know, David, if that's even, the kind of, where you guys were further on with the RST or, some of the stuff that was going on, but even myself, who, was usually right behind the board and so on, and some of the guys in the bus, we were like, hold on a minute, we're not really getting treated properly, or they don't seem to appreciate us. We've been through a lot of pain with them way in the past and so on. Now it seems to be they've got to this stage now, and it's like, well, if they don't like it, there'll be other people who'll come, and
Now, there's always...
David.
Sorry, go
on. Ian Skelly is on the board. Walter Smith now takes his place on the board. Something obviously Graham Souness had done before. This is more the traditional Rangers manager having his place on the board that has been in place before. One departure was Hugh Adam. Big falling out with Murray. He would be the correct prophet of doom years later. Alan's talking about cracks there. We will forget about those cracks very quickly as the months wear on in this season. But perhaps there's your start.
I don't think you can ever underestimate the power of reflected glory. And I think that was what this was intended to be. Also, advertising for Ian Skelly. Look, the players have these motors. You too can have this motor if you come to Ian Skelly. But we couldn't have those. That was the point. We were spending a lot of money, more money than we'd spent previously. Ticket prices aren't quite at the falling out level that will come through the Champions League campaigns, but there was a sense that it was vulgar, and it wasn't purely, I think, rabble rousers, because there weren't many rabble rousers at this period. There weren't, critiques. You had the Rangers Supporters Association, and they were tickets and parking guys, and proudly so.
Yeah.
So I remember, certainly, I'm 14, summer of 1992, and I'm reading, I'm reading all the books at yours. I'm getting into the Velvet Underground, and I remember being, on the one hand, the type that would wave a tenner at opposition fans, oh, we've so much money, but then on the other hand thinking, I wish we could buy a motor, and there was that sense of they're just going away from us now. They'll just move into a place, and you would start to get these groans about it's not about how loyal you are, it's about how much money you can spend, which is an eternal one. I think it's true, but
Yeah.
I don't think under any by all means advertise, but a marketing person would come in and go, basically rubbing their face in, the stuff you've got that they don't is probably a bad idea with your customer base. So there was definitely a change happening, and Rangers were sprinting off to it. And it was tough. We were conflicted, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for. Because on the one hand, we loved that. We loved, we're kings of the hill. We're rich, even if we as individuals aren't. Our club are rich. But I think that this then actually has a bit of a negative practical effect, which is opposition clubs charging us ridiculous money for away tickets. It doesn't matter if you're a Rangers fan or an Albion Rovers fan. If you work in the same factory and you make the same money, then it doesn't matter that you support Rangers who've got millions and you support Albion Rovers who don't. And that became a thing. It was all right to charge Rangers fans extra because Rangers had loads of money. Yeah, but I didn't. And that, I think, was a negative effect of it. That on the one hand, we sort of enjoyed that. And on the other hand, you were a little bit uncomfortable, I think.
Any reflections on the Hugh Adam departure and the way that it was done?
Yeah, Hugh Adam was a decent guy. And he completely fell out with Murray the way that Murray was running it. Again, coming from, I think it's fair to say, and Martyn, you've done more research on this than me, a more collegiate way of doing things.
Yeah.
And Murray does not have a collegiate way of doing things.
Corporate governance, I think, is probably, even at the lowest.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of the way that Murray, Mark and I, Mark Dingwall, we had a meeting with Murray in the Charlotte Square office. And he brought a guy in who was the financial director of Murray International Metals. Now, that's quite a big post, isn't it? Financial director. And at one point he says, away and get the boys a cup of tea, just in front of us, to the financial director.
Yeah.
And me and Mark are kind of like, the guy's face just drops. And that was David Murray. He was the king of whichever room and empire he was in. It was that simple. And if you wanted to go along with it, then you had to get on board with it. And Hugh Adam didn't. And because of that, he was able to get a bit of distance and take a critical look at Murray, which unfortunately it was easy to dismiss as sour grapes. But the problem was maybe it was based from sour grapes, but the problem was it was also accurate sour grapes, as we would see. But yeah, Murray was, this was his show. And I think someone actually mentioned to me the famous phrase about if they put down a fiver. He didn't say, we'll put down a tenner. He says, I'll put down a tenner. That, I think, is a huge insight into him.
Yeah, and he didn't. But that's for later on in this series, I think it's probably fair to say. So, yeah, Scottish football, full of clouds, very different to the clear blue skies that were opening up perhaps down south. But Watersmith not overly concerned. This was a summer of tinkering rather than flashing new faces. It was bringing players back, really. Dave McPherson made sense. He had a good season with Hearts under the UEFA restrictions, which were tightening now. It had gone from 4 foreigners to 3. This made, as I said, perfect sense, and he was fine in the Euros as well. We'd brought in Ali Maxwell late on, actually, in 91-92 as cover for Gorham. Again, we don't know what comes next, but Maxwell he was still a hero after that 91 Scottish Cup final, and again, as a backup, it was a move that kind of made sense. He was happy to let John Spencer and Paul Rideout go for, I think, £1 million. Again, Rangers did
over £1 million, mate. 500,000 for Rideout and 600,000
Yeah,
for Spencer.
it showed you the Rangers could still they can still get some cash back for players. It left McCoist and Haley a bit exposed, but Smith was a little stung by that questioning. He said, well, I've got Gary McSwiggan, I'm quite content to use him. I'm kind of damned if I do, damned if I don't here, because, people are complaining about not letting young players get their time. But he says, I hope that the necessity of us having to buy backup players from England at £500 a pop has gone. Smith still believed that something was lacking in midfield, a ball player rather than the kind of boundless energy that he had, someone to replace the gap left by Trevor Steven the previous summer, ideally Trevor Steven, which was made possible. He had not enjoyed his year in Provence, it's probably fair to say, and the feeling was mutual. Marseille hadn't actually completed payment for the original fee. Rangers thought they were in a good position to do business. Tappy tried to play the game, I suppose. Marseille wanted 3 million. Leeds United, English champions at the time, were happy to pay, but Trevor Steven wasn't interested. He was digging in for a move back to Ibrox. He was putting the reserves, and Tappy said, absolutely no chance would he feature for Marseille in the friendly Ibrox the coming Tuesday, but it was all bluster. And on the Friday evening, 2.4 million was enough to bring Steven back. Alan, the summer had started with rumours of Lothar Matthäus coming, genuine links. I think Murray kind of confirmed that. I would have said the Scottish Sun was actually boycotted by Celtic fans for suggesting that we're going to buy Paul McStay. But 2 returning players, was there a sense, given the summers that we've had, right? The quite a lot of money spent, Mikhailichenko and Stuart McCall coming from England, and Haitley, Kuznetsov, Maurice Johnston, Gary Stevens, Trevor Steven, to have we've seen these guys, this isn't quite as shiny? Or was there a sense, especially with Steven, that, it's good to have him back?
Trevor Steven obviously was a great one to get back. I mean, I think most Rangers fans love Trevor Steven, such a quality player. And at the time when he went away, it's a bit like nowadays, it's the money seemed to be, we can't really refuse it. It was such a great kind of financial, deal for us at the time. So that one was, I think Davy McPherson, it was cover. It didn't make sense in that he could cover either at centre half or probably right back. He could even do a wee bit maybe in midfield, but it was obviously in terms of quality compared to Gary Stevens and so on. But it was fine in terms of I don't know. I mean, I remember him coming through even as a young laddie and so on. So it was okay, but it wasn't something that we were all excited about. I thought it was interesting the comment that Walter made as well about the spending 500,000 quid as a kind of cover. And the fact, if you look at it then with the Trevor Steven one, it's not even really an outlay. It's more a case of they haven't given us all that they should have now. Do you know what I mean? I don't even know then with Walter Smith whether there was maybe a wee bit more of a squeeze in terms of, what he had to play with. Because in effect, they've not really spent too much, have they, compared to obviously some of the previous seasons. Obviously, things will change going down, But from our point of view, I mean, we were really positive with the squad that we had anyway that finished the season before. And as you say, in terms of over the piece, I don't think there was any real worry, in terms of the league and so on. Trevor Steven, brilliant. That's good to get him back. And as I say, Big Davy McPherson more just as a squad. I was a wee bit worried as well about, I know we mentioned the Gary McSwiggan one, but I just always feel having just the 2 of them, like Haitley and McCoist, and the number of games you've got to play and so on, you can suddenly lose one of your main strikers, as we'll see, then we have to change and move the deck chairs about.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say it's a very quiet summer, just under £4 million in 1980.
I know.
Relative,
it's all relative, isn't it? Yeah.
Davey, there was nothing in Paul McStay coming to Ibrox that summer. That was nonsense.
No.
I am led to believe, though, a few years ago that was at least looked into by Graham Souness, but certainly by this point, absolutely not. The talk was, of course, he'd at the end of that 91-92 season, he'd gone to the jungle, he'd thrown his top in, it was an emotional goodbye, just as he was going to go and just count the offers from Serie A and England. I think it was only Everton that came in with an actual offer, and all of a sudden he's staying. Now, this produced mixed feelings at Parkhead because McStay was loved. I think Liam Brady was kind of banking on being able to spend that transfer income around the team. In the end, he would spend 1.7 million on the Albanian defender Rudi Vata and the West Ham forward Stuart Slater, the latter of whom would score 3 goals. It was just yet another episode in the farce that was kind of ongoing over there.
Yeah, they later tried to spin it that McStay hadn't been saying his goodbyes and he'd always intended to stay, and that actually Liverpool were interested in him. None of which were true, unfortunately. Yeah, he was leaving, and I think there was a feeling from their fans that it was kind of time. Great servant, supporter of the club, but it was time for him to go and, as you say, refresh the team a little, and then that doesn't happen. And I think if you look at McStay's later career, there is a sort of sense of I'm here forever, in his performances. There would be good ones, and there's a particularly painful one when I think they beat us 2-0 at Ibrox and he got a goal. But overall, I think there was this sense of regret that almost emanated from him that he hadn't had the opportunity, because there had been a lot of talk. I think Udinese were really quoted in the Scottish papers at the time, and as I say, the Liverpool link was made, and Arsenal. What can you imagine him playing in a George Graham team? By the way, that would have been, yeah, I mean, just bollocks. So he doesn't go, and then they have to bring in players. Slater was a very weird one even then, because it looked a lot of money for a guy who hadn't massively impressed down south. He'd been all right, but £1 million was a lot of money back then. Or I think it was closer to £1.5 million actually. And it was an awful lot of money when you don't have a big budget and you've got a lot of holes in your team. I always knew back then when Celtic were a wee bit worried about what they had, because the stories would start coming. They would get, the quality street kids, and we'd start hearing about, it was always the next, we've got Simon Donnell, he's the next Kenny Dalglish. We've got Brian McLaughlin, he's the next Jimmy Johnston. Whenever
Baggio and all that, wasn't it? It was the other
right,
one,
whenever they Garbaggio, whenever they started to tell us about their youth teams, and you heard more about players in their youth team in the papers and you heard about the guys in their first team, that was generally a sign that they weren't going to do much. But Slater's a big sign, but they just get disastrously wrong. And that's the thing about when you don't have much money, and we've been through this in the last few years, you do spend some, and they did spend some, but it's kind of like reminiscent for younger bears. It's sort of like Joey Garner. When you spend a decent amount on a player,
you need to do it wisely rather than just.
They need to be a success, absolutely. And if you look at Celtic's players throughout this era, Cascarino famously, but also Slater, Hayes slightly before that. Whenever they brought a big player in, possibly because of the pressure and possibly because of each succeeding failure, the pressure on them was absolutely enormous. But I certainly had zero worries whatsoever about Celtic.
I think at that time too, David, it was interesting because I think, as Martyn mentioned, even during the Souness time, if we had someone that didn't quite work out, we tended to be able to sell them and maybe even make a wee bit on them. Yeah. But as you say, Celtic have got very little to play with. They use it, the guy flops, they're not going to be able to. No. Do you know what I mean?
The losses they took, I mean, they got a wee bit lucky, I think, in terms of they swapped Cascarino for Tom Boyd, who did a job for them for a few seasons. But Hayes, they ended up taking, I think, a 600 grand loss on. Slater, they took a bath on. I mean, he just, he had no resale value by the time he left. So you're absolutely right. In terms of our signings, Martyn, that you mentioned, I must admit, and again, I was 15 and wouldn't claim to know the world, but I was actually very disappointed. I did think,
by the way,
we've seen this before. Aye, yeah. Not so much back. It's a backward step. I didn't think that. I thought, I love Trevor Stephen. I thought McPherson was a donkey. I thought he was a donkey the first time.
Pick your club kind of thing.
Yeah, you pick one, you're going. And again, you and I have talked about this. Graham Souness, who was our tribal leader. I thought McPherson was a donkey. I couldn't believe we were getting him. I get the Scottish thing, I really do, and he was fine. But I couldn't see it at all. Stephen, good, but there was just a sense of and then I was actually a wee bit disappointed that and this probably says a lot about where we were. I was quite disappointed, and again, I'm a shallow and callow youth, folks. So please forgive me for this, but I remember being McSwaggan. We're playing McSwaggan. Who the hell is McSwaggan? And that's the age I am. I've grown up where we just go out and buy somebody. So I'm going to play Gary McSwaggan. Why are you going to play Gary McSwaggan? Go and buy somebody good, somebody I've heard of, basically.
Davey, I can almost hear John Cowden over in Athens talking about when we used to bring players through at 17, 18-year-old and so on. They would turn into legends. But as you say, totally different time now, isn't it? You know.
All I've grown up with, Alan, is go and sign somebody, even if it's just a guy from Scottish football for 300-400 grand. Go and pick somebody up.
You want to see a picture with the strip on, or they're waving a scarf, and that's yes. Pretty much that's how we want to spend our summers. We had pictures of Trevor Stephen and Dave McPherson doing that. We didn't really need new ones. Conscious of time, so we'll need to kind of pick up the pace. Rangers' pace in the pre-season friendly, David, the pre-season friendly, I guess the key one, was at home to Marseille. The Marseille manager Jean Fernandez. Marseille won 2-1. They were. It was an exhibition. Haley got a penalty.
Shitty anyway, wasn't it? Really,
it really was.
Two in a minute. Rudy Vord, Didier Deschamps, and Haley got a penalty late on. Jean Fernandez was the manager. He tried to talk down their chances of winning the first Champions League. They were top seeds, but he was pretty sure about the fate of Rangers. I don't really think they can do well in Europe, he said. By the time Marseille came back, Fernandez would not be in charge. Trevor Stephen played. He got a knock. He shouldn't have played. He wasn't registered. Rangers thought he had and just kind of played him anyway. Jim Farry threatened serious, grave action for this administrative oversight, but nothing happened. Durant and Miko were on the bench. They never really get used. It was probably a wee bit too early to judge, but we did anyway, David. And Rangers were seeded 9th in that draw. We were paired with the Danish champions Lyngby in the first round of the European Cup. Now, listeners, that might not sound that daunting, and I guess it wasn't, but Denmark had won the European Championships. Rangers were dreadful in Europe, let's be honest. Really, this is 3 years in a row where they haven't, gone past the second round. There was a fair bit of trepidation that this would be another banana skin here, and that Marseille friendly did not do those nails any good.
I think there's an interesting point. Alan referred to it earlier, and it's maybe something that we should dig down on, was Rangers' constant bad starts in this period. Yeah. I don't think I'm being offside to say that our training wasn't structured right, because we came... I get Alan's point earlier about we did players on international duty, but we were gishing off years as well. We'd come back, and it took us... Now, the counter to that was we were very good at putting the foot down through the winter. And just peeling away from people. But you couldn't even say it was this modern thing of, well, we want them to have some gas in the tank at the end of the season, because on the video for 92-93, Ali McCoist is saying, oh, we had nothing left. Me and the boys were the cup final. I was at to Big Mark, and Big Mark says, no, I've nothing left. So it wasn't that. It was just a sluggish start. Marseille took us apart. It was exhibition is the word. I mean, oh my God, that penalty was sheer sympathy from the referee. He's like, there's a lot of people paid money to come here today, so I'll give you a go. Lyngby, yeah, I thought we should beat them, and we should have beat them. But I've got Prague just sitting in my mind, and I hadn't really seen Rangers have success in Europe bar that 187-88. I haven't seen it yet at this stage of my Rangers supporting career. So, I was nervous. And this newfangled Champions League thing that they spoke of, where you'd get 6 matches, and I really desperately wanted to be a part of it.
You're in it till April, right? I mean, it's such a game changer. But yeah, it was. It was certainly no gimme, that's fair to say, but it was an open draw, so we could have got Marseille. So that was that would not have been particularly pleasant. Yeah, in terms of starts, 80-89, that's the one that sticks out, because it was an absolute clear the decks. Last season was a disaster. We're going to Italy, and you're going to run your fucking lungs off, and that's basically what happened. The Rangers were in turbo. We were not in turbo. at the start of 92-93, which was starting early, 1st of August, which felt very early, by the way. I know that's the norm now. Wasn't then. 9 domestic games in August, and there's a lot of rustiness. Opening fixtures were pretty benign, but it didn't seem to matter. Rangers still kind of struggle along. It should be. I have to say this. I won't get into a big discussion about it. Celtic's opening fixtures weren't quite as benign. They had Celtic. They went away to Hearts and Aberdeen in their first 2 games away, and the Celtic View, not the View, not a fanzine, the Celtic View, the official newspaper, used its front page to highlight the perceived lack of fairness by printing Celtic's first 4 league games and Rangers' first 4 league games.
Jeez, there you go.
So there we are. Things clearly not well. St Johnstone and beaten cup finalists Airdrie from the last season. They came to Ibrox in the first 2 games. They set that defensive stall out. We would see it many times after that. We took full points, 1-0, 2-0, but it was dull, boring stuff. Wasn't going to get much better. Easter Road, attritional, bad-tempered 0-0 draw. And if Rangers were set to endure stalemates, McCoy said after the opening day that it was unlikely to see Rangers score as many goals in this campaign as the previous one. Ray were given the shock of their lives at Den Park on the 15th of August. Simon Stainrod, Alan, this eccentric figure, seemingly inspired by Malcolm Allison more than anyone else, took a very different approach to the visit to the champions. They were ahead 4 times in a ridiculous game of serve and volley, and Rangers couldn't equalise for a 4th time, and it marked the first defeat of the season after only 2 weeks. It would be 7 months before that happened again, but we did not know that, Alan, and
No.
if the fans around the open line and hotlines, whatever, believe that, looking at that defensive display, why is McPherson back? He's rubbish. Maxwell played that day because Gorham had a slight strain. Really? Is he going to be a replacement for Gorham when we need him? And more importantly, if he was fit, why is Ian Durrant not starting? Because he was on the bench again. That Saturday afternoon was utterly insane.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going back down the road, and as you say, there was always in the back, there's so many games to catch up, and as David said, through the winter period, so there was, and if you go back even through the 70s, honestly, the number of times we started a season absolutely hopeless, I don't know as well, David, you mentioned it about kind of looking, obviously on another show about this start thing, I don't know as well about the attitude as well of some of the players too. I mean, we've sort of won the double. We've done the Scottish Cup. Obviously, they've got the kind of break. The fans too. I don't know whether just as we start the season, there's this whole kind of we're going through the motions. As you say, we won 1-0, 2-0. I think we drew Easter Road as well, didn't we? Obviously, we got up to Dundee, and then ultimately you'll get to the Aberdeen one. But I don't know. I don't know whether there's a mentality thing as well, not just the whole maybe not getting them up to shape. I just sometimes wonder if we were getting a wee bit too big for our boots and we needed some rocket up our backside to really focus and reset. Yeah.
Well, I go back to that season preview. It is over. It's a foregone conclusion. Rangers will last the 44 games far easier than anyone else. There might be some upsets. You don't need to start the house on fire. There's no competition.
No.
Doesn't necessarily. It's apogee the following season.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
yes, for a whole season.
Yeah,
and
for a whole
more.
season of it, because we can go at 60%. We'll be fine.
Absolute slippers on. The Durrant question, Dave, was more acute the following weekend, although the mood's slightly better. Celtic came to Ibrox, they were a point clear of Rangers. They stayed that way after a 1-1, a Towsy 1-1 draw. I think that's probably fair to say. Rangers should have been ahead early in the match. Trevor Stephen goal ruled offside despite Celtic defenders being stood inside the box as Hateley flicked the ball on for Stephen to run from outside of it. That didn't make the front page or any page of the Celtic View. The visitors with the better side for much of that first hour deserved to take the lead, but it was a bit of a freaky goal, to be honest, from Jerry Craney. But they were unsure, they were insecure with that lead. What do we do? And Durrant come on, and Rangers just hunted him down. Moving from space, finished with super power, and Smith's kind of reticence to expose Durrant too much too soon was understandable, but with the pressure building, you kind of had to trust him with a more permanent role. If we'd lost that game, David.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the attitude would have been murderous. I remember the Dundee defeat, as you say, being met with apoplexy. Not just the fact we'd lost, but the way we'd lost. I think people assumed if we were going to lose, it'd be, a heroic defensive display.
2-1 or 1-0 or something like that.
1-0, a goal, nick a goal and then sit on it. The team just came out and outplayed us in a football match. And And as Alan mentioned there, our guys looked a little surprised that somebody was daring to come out and play football against them. You're absolutely right. I mean, this goal, it's up there with the Davy Robertson the ruled out goal and the 3 each, but you never hear of it because we're not insane. But you couldn't argue your description there of Celtic being a better team for the first hour is absolutely true. Probably the worst thing that happened to them was scoring.
Yeah.
Because after they scored, they got overexcited and they didn't know should we stick or should we twist. And in the end, they did neither. Really, they did the kind of halfway house, and Rangers were able to get back into it. Duran, I understand on a human level Walter's reticence, incidentally, because such a precious thing. And there's going to be that overprotective nature. It speaks a lot for Walter Smith as a man that he was like that. You mentioned there, but when times were tough, Durant would come in. And isn't that the case for the next 5 years? That, even going up to that game that we, the Old Firm game to really win 9 in a row, he's there. Wherever you needed him in a big match. And we've discussed this before, that I think that he's a first example of us as fans needing to remember that these guys are not two-dimensional characters, that they're human beings. We had it in our head, he's fit now. End of story, right? He wasn't fit, and now it was a binary thing. And now he can play every game because that's what footballers do. And we now, thankfully, know a bit later on that isn't the case. Footballers' bodies need managed. And he was an example of that, of he couldn't play it, or he could have. Physically, he could have played every week, but he could not have gave of his best if he'd played every week. And what he did magnificently throughout the rest of his career was say, right, I can't be, 100% Ian Durant at my zenith game in, game out. So I'll make sure when it happens, it's when it really, really matters. This season, by the way, is an absolutely perfect example. Look at the amount of big moments, big games he's involved in. David, I just think we didn't understand it. That's okay. I just don't think we did get it back then.
No, I think, see what you said, I had taken a wee note to bring this one up as well. During this season, he'll actually play 25 domestic games from the start, 13 as a sub, but obviously in Europe as well, he'll play 9 of them. So it's like 34 plus 13. And as you say, all the way through it, I've just got the picture of him with this great Adidas, strip and Durant. Whether it's the Marseille goal or as you say, the Celtic one, doing Leeds games or whatever. But the
Scottish
thing about,
Cup final. He's playing off Big Haley and brilliantly play. I mean, a role we hadn't seen, I think, in Scotland very often.
And it showed his intelligence as well, because when he got that injury, he wasn't going to be able to play that way he did. But my God, the guy could play deep in midfield. He could still, as you say, he could actually play up at the front with Big Haley. But just such an intelligent, and he said as well, I think if you look at the video in Europe as well, he said that's even better, he says, because I got a wee bit more time and I can put passes in. And it was just wonderful, wasn't it?
Well, he goes, and this is a few years hence, but 98, he goes to Kilmarnock, and he's one of the best players in the Scottish Premier League because the games aren't played at the mental pace every week that a Rangers match is. And he would, as you say, he goes from being primarily known as an attacking midfielder, he goes and basically quarterbacks for them for a couple of years, and he's magnificent. He had a football brain that was so far in advance, not only in terms of what he could do on a pitch, but knowing how to get the best out of the resources that he had been left with after the injury. So I think Walter actually husbands him pretty well throughout this season. I think, as you say, he gets when we need an Ian Durant in there. But this is not, Martyn, something that's just going to be stuck to this month and then goes away. I remember watching the McCall Ferguson midfield. 2 players I love, by the way, but it was, again, for younger listeners, the Jiggy do midfield, right? We were all going, why we get 2 defensive midfielders in there? We don't need that. Play Ian Durant. So for the whole of his career after this, we never really got. But I do wonder if part of that was nobody ever really explained stuff like this to us. You just didn't get that. It wasn't the done thing. You got pictures of footballers in the papers dressed up as, hot dogs for some promotion, wearing funny hats and stuff. Nobody ever went, Walter, why does Ian Durrant not play, but he plays the big games? And Walter could have said, well, actually, we can't play him or we could, but nobody did that. It didn't really happen. So for the next 5 years, I remember so often being in Ibrox going, bring Durrant on. Why are we playing Nato? And it just was an ongoing thing that now, 30 years later, I look back and go, obviously, David, he couldn't do it every week. But my God, see when Ian Durrant was set a task, few better at achieving it.
Rangers had helped themselves to 10 goals in the first 2 rounds of the Skull League Cup, away to Dumbarton and Stranraer, but the quarter-final trip to Tannadice was a lot closer. Needed a Peter Hoostrom win on extra time to edge Rangers through to the last 4 after an entertaining but tense 3-2 win. Mark Hateley missed that trip following a knock against Celtic, and he would miss the visit of Aberdeen on Saturday 29th of August, where for 45 minutes it looked like more of the same stodgy and insipid league form, until, of course, that half-time dressing room fight and Walter Smith's team talk.
Kalachenko again, Aberdeen closing everyone down. It's going to take something special to open them up, and so far Rangers showing no signs of doing that. Now the fans getting more behind them. John Brown still well forward, chests it down to Durrant. Kalachenko, Durrant. Oh, wonderful goal by Ian Durrant. 53 minutes gone, and surely now that will lift Rangers out of their lethargy. At last, a piece of magic. Kalachenko was involved with Durrant. Durrant coming forward there, played it to the Ukrainian. It was laid off to him. And a lovely shot there, right into the corner of the net, giving Snelders no chance. Durrant was the hero of Ibrox for the second week running. Away though by McPherson. Now it's Durrant. Good ball through to Ali McCoist, who's onside. McCoist! 2-1 to Rangers! Well, Ali McCoist, who had a lean afternoon, strikes again. That's his 9th goal of the season, 61 minutes. Ali McCoist, look at the delight on his face. Ian Durrant taking more and more of a grip in this game. Sent the ball through to him, he was played onside by Irvine, he had the pace to get away from the Aberdeen defender, and he slotted the ball brilliantly behind Theo Snelders. One sent off, and an assistant manager sent to the stand. It's been a busy afternoon for the referee. It's Kalachenko! And that puts it beyond doubt. A magnificent strike by Alexei Kalachenko. He thundered that ball beyond Theo Snelders. And that's 3 excellent second half goals by Rangers. It was McPherson who played it right across the face of the penalty area. It was partially cleared by Irvine and drilled home by Alexei Kalachenko.
Right, it wasn't just all blood and snotters. Get your fingers out. There was a tactical switch. I think Hoostra and Miko swapped flanks. Ian Durrant, who we've just been speaking about, pushes further forward. Davey, you and I, in fact, I'll go to Alan, because Davey, you and I have spoken about this umpteen time. This game, I'm 11 years old. I've been to Rangers games before. I've enjoyed many of them. I was thrilled. I mean, there's something so boyish and childlike about this, but it genuinely was that. I was talking about it all night. It was in Scott Sports, so you had to wait the 24 hours to see it again. It was just a different Rangers team. They were on fire. The goal, all 3 of them were superb. Everything came alive and wouldn't stop really for about 6 months, but it's funny how entire seasons can just flip like that, because I was blown away, and I don't think I was the only one.
It was like a switch, Martyn. Someone had just flicked a switch. Obviously, this had happened in the dressing room. What I loved about it as well is when you see Ali McCoist, he said the manager told us the gaffer told us in no uncertain terms. Walter just had a wee smile and said, yeah, we asked them at half-time to raise their game. So you can imagine what's going on. But as you say, the minute they come back out there, suddenly the noise, and then the way Rangers, once we get the first goal, which was tucked away really nicely, and then Ali got one, I think, to make it 2, didn't he? and then was it Miko at the end?
Yeah, Miko outside his boot.
But it was absolutely just blew them away. And as you say, from then on, it was just as if, right, this is 92-93 season. Just watch us go now.
Here we go. One of the interesting things I think is, again, that game might have gone differently had Rangers not been quite as poor in the first half. Can you imagine if it'd been close and Aberdeen were 1-0 up, Aberdeen might have held on, believe it or not, for a 1-0 victory. They could have, or 1-2-1. Whereas I think that Rangers were so bad in that. Talk about the old cliche, a game of two halves. Honestly, folks, you've never, if you didn't see this, you've never seen anything like it. Rangers were inept in the first half. They couldn't get anything going. Passes were being misplaced, and they were doing the thing that you referred to at the start, Martyn. It wasn't just the Gorham incident was the most obvious, but there was plenty of hands being thrown up in the air about you didn't run for it or you've overhit that. There was a lot of that going on, and then they came out the second half, and again, as Alan says, there's the Ibrox roar. We've all heard this, Rangers down at half time and getting it, but then when it becomes symbiotic, when you see the improvement, which there was almost immediately visibly, then the crowd get more into it, and suddenly it's a completely different game. We get the goal, and then there's only one winner. But it is interesting that they sort of needed to hit that real low. Maybe it Lance Boyle, I don't know. Maybe it could have petered on for a few more weeks like this. Whereas instead, the fact that they were so shockingly bad, I think, shocking to themselves more that how are we doing, why are we doing this, that something just changed and they just didn't know. And we go back to what we just talked about, the starts of the season, the complacency. Finally the pilot light was lit,
and for all that doom and gloom and all that 44 games and Scottish football the way it is, it was fun again. That 45 minutes was just joy.
See the crowd as well, Martyn. It's that one where all the four stands, isn't it? As David said, there's this suddenly you're going down, oh, you bloody think so? And then suddenly it starts, and before you know it, the singing goes all the way around, which I just think is wonderful at Ibrox. And again, the impact that has on the opposition as well. They're like, geez, it was like two different games.
And it's a big game, and Aberdeen have a healthy contingent there. And suddenly Ibrox is a cauldron, and goodness, we only need to look at season 21-22 to know the difference it can make. And the football suddenly was exactly what Rangers had been playing, what we had sort of got used to the previous season, and what we expected to see this season. I honestly cannot, and the guys I'm sure will back me up in this, I don't think I can get across just how different the two halves were.
Yeah.
The first half, as Martyn said, it was a chore because Aberdeen weren't great. They were a goal. Roy Aitken scored, for fuck's sake. Now,
says everything, doesn't it? Yeah.
If you're in a football match where Roy Aitken's a deciding factor in a good way, then things aren't progressing the way they're supposed to. But the second half, Rangers come out and monstered them. And I remember my dad saying to me, well, where's this been? Because he's a Rangers fan, and therefore it's not enough to just sit and enjoy the fact a good performance is now happening. You've got to complain about, the fact that it hasn't been there. But there was a shout of that, but also there was a sense of, not with hindsight we can say there was a sense of everything will be fine from here on in because we know how it ends. I don't think that. There was a sense of you've put a marker down.
Yeah,
that's what you should be doing. That's what you can do. So it was a much more energised crowd that left that day, a much more positive crowd, but it wasn't everything is going to be okay and then suddenly it was all roses and petals thrown at their feet. It was more right,
that's
good.
what
There's our Rangers back, and but now you have to keep doing that.
Gents, we're up and running on the greatest season. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Martyn. Really enjoyed it. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you to both of you. I really enjoyed it. I hope the listeners do too.
Tensions disappeared. It's fun again. Rangers ended that chaotic month of August in second place, 1 point behind Dundee United. But even by that stage, in all honesty, there was little doubt about where the domestic direction of travel was heading. Europe, however, was a different question. Until next week, bye for now.